Liberation is something negative, as freedom itself is, yet the soul feels confident of finding great things to do, if only the enemy would let it alone. This is an illusion, because the soul could not live for a moment without the support and suggestions of the environment, and even if, by an unnatural abstraction, we imagine the soul living on by itself, as in a dream, then, when once the vestiges of its old dependence on the flesh and the world were erased, it would be reduced to feeling itself lingering on in a void, watching the flow of sheer duration, and wishing it might go to sleep. The illusion of fertile freedom comes of not distinguishing dependence from distraction. The sources of life and will flow into us and become ourselves, and so long as we move in harmony with the part of them that remains outside, we think we are our own masters, and even masters over all other things. It is only when there is conflict, and our spontaneity is not only fed and guided by circumstances, but also thwarted by them, that we protest against them and wish to be free. Liberation, however, would bring no positive benefit, but at best the peace of death, unless it were a mere preliminary to union. This, though not always understood by politicians, has always been understood by mystics. Union, even identification, is their constant watchword, and words fail them to describe the fullness and rapture of that consummation. I trust their sincerity, but I doubt their self-knowledge, and in any case, we must ask ourselves, since they fail to tell us, with what they are united, and in what sense union with such a thing may be possible. It would be useless to recite the names given to the supreme object, God, Brahma, the One, the Absolute. The question is what these words stand for, and as a beginning, I'll take the name given to this ultimate object by Plato and his followers, who are comparatively articulate, and the origin of whose doctrines we are able partly to trace. This name is the Good. It is with the Good that a liberated soul should be united. Socrates, in whose mouth Plato puts his views on the subject, was an austere moralist, what we should call a reactionary and a man of the right, inveighing against the sophistry and luxury of his age, and idealizing the principles of simpler, harsher, and more religious times. But like all reactionaries that found a new order, he was a man of the people, with the tone and manners of that corrupt society which he condemned, and though occasionally he seems to have reached extremes of asceticism and mystic abstraction, which made him the precursor of the cynics and the monks, he ordinarily passed his days eating and drinking, reasoning and joking, and pushing a plebeian utilitarianism to its most comical consequences. Thus he maintained that his own Popeyes, upturned nostrils, and voluminous gross mouth were better and more beautiful than regular features, because they served and expressed better the uses of those organs. Such paradoxes, in raising a laugh, were meant to awaken the conscience. Away, they suggested, with all prejudices, all whims, all empty pleasures. There is a true, a perfect, a sublime good within reach, to which it would be a joy and a deliverance to sacrifice everything else. This good, as we learn ultimately, is harmony, to be established by the perfect definition and mutual adjustment of all natural functions, both in the individual and in the state. Nothing could be soberer, more hygienic, more politic. Here is the ancient Greek sage, chosen to legislate for his city in earlier times, but now condemned to legislate only for his own thoughts. Othello's occupation is gone, yet this enforced futility, if it favors exaggeration in the moralist, also favors freedom of mind and tongue and poetic aspiration. Playfully, on a small scale, solemnly in prophetic moments, we find the homely Socrates harping on love, that harmony, that rational good, which seems so abstract a conception and argument, and so cold and repressive a utopia in political philosophy, appears visibly to the heart in everything young and beautiful and positively transports the soul in moments of religious rapture. The good, then, is not merely a harmony to be established or approached in the economy of nature. It is an influence to be felt, an inner transformation to be experienced, a beatific vision and union with God. Are we then in the presence of two goods, and will union with one of them mean something entirely different from union with the other? Not altogether, for dissimilar as the two goods are in description, they are one in origin and may converge in attainment. Erotic feeling permeates all mysticism, but erotic feeling belongs to the machinery of reproduction, that is to say, to one of the most elaborate and therefore precarious harmonies established by nature in the institution of animal life. No doubt it is precisely when this animal harmony is suspended or deranged that the feeling belonging to it overflows or is sublimated into ideal enthusiasms. But we need not conclude that the ideal enthusiasms cling now to no other, perhaps wider, harmonies, and are wholly hectic and diseased. The boys with whom Socrates pretended to be in love were for the most part non-entities, and the notion of breeding philosophy out of them was preposterous. Yet Plato was among them, and a legitimate Socratic philosophy was begotten in him and propagated to our own minds. So too those beautiful institutions, which were to be the stepping stones to the highest good, though never realized as conceived, were missed instances of social harmony that, in other forms, may be often realized. They may actually enlist vivid devotion, and may support materially the happiness found in maintaining them. Even that union with God, more often talked of than experienced, need not be an illusion, because the universe has, at each moment, and in its total career, a particular form with which everything that exists must needs be in an actual harmony, and nothing forbids some sense of this harmony to resound occasionally in a particular soul, and to overcome it. I say advisedly to overcome it, because in a union, even if called a union with the good, some sacrifice is involved. In embracing the greater good, the soul abandons some or all of its former affections. It therefore abandons some forms of the good, and the notion that all good can be found in one moment or in one object is merely rhetorical. Often, and not only in an ultimate mystic trance, all other goods may be forgotten. They may cease to be desired, but this exclusiveness of itself suffices to prove that a psyche in a special phase is pronouncing that judgment, and that this judgment, if made dogmatic, is egotistical. The other goods remain good for the other phases of the psyche, and the determination and discipline that fix allegiance and love on a single good are sacrificial. For that they reason they are healthy, noble, and, if achieved deliberately, even sublime, since this willingness to surrender true goods, admitted and felt to be good, for the sake of one good only, offers to the beloved a supreme proof of love, and to the world a supreme example of wisdom and humility. Commonly, the word union is understood eulogistically, as signifying a true strength and range for the elements united, so that the gain overbalances any losses involved. Yet in marriage and other social partnerships, the living unit remains the individual person, and the union is likely to be partly disunion and a latent war. Therefore, union, in the eulogistic sense, must be carefully distinguished from interdependence. Interdependence, whether logical or physical, may be like the interdependence of the man hanged and the hangman. Now, spirit has no occasion to aspire interdependence with the universe, with the truth, or with the residual life of the psyche, because it is allied with these already, genetically, totally, and compulsorily. This biological bond is worth mentioning in view of the confused pantheistic sentiment that professes to see a marvelous consummation in this necessary cosmic unity or equilibrium. Conformity with fate, or with the will of God, which cannot be defeated, is a needful though partial factor in spiritual peace. Yet brings peace only when the spirit conforms spontaneously, and that the order of nature seems to us magnificent as well as irresistible, and the intuition of that order becomes our happiest employment. Such epic or stoic sentiments are included as occasional events in the same universal order that includes every actual crime, folly, and torment. Yet this fact by no means involves logically that spirit should aspire to nothing in its own life except this helpless acknowledgement and deadly resignation. Spirit can aspire to union in a eulogistic sense only with the object of its congenital love, in union with which its own life would be perfected. Virtual knowledge of the truth, in so far as relevant, and conformity with it, are indeed involved in such a union, because spirit is natively intelligent. But much else is involved also, because spirit is not, as Aristotle supposed, a disembodied act of thinking about thinking, or a hypostasis of general ideas, but is the passionate and delicate flowering of some animal soul, to whom much that exists is inimical, and much would be lovely that does not exist. Socrates and Plato were therefore true spokesmen and great liberators of the spirit when they made the good, and not the universe, or even the truth, the goal of life, attainment of which was happiness. They thereby placed the object of union in the moral sphere, which is that of spirit, because of material union with the universe, or fusion with the absolute, no spirit is required or even permitted to survive. There can be no union where there are not at least two things to be united. If one is suppressed, the other may remain, but not the union between them. And if the two are merged in a single thought or feeling, this feeling or thought is a new fact, a material resultant, perhaps, of the two previous existence, but not a union between them, since both now have ceased to exist. Union in prayer or in love requires the persistent physical separateness of the two beings united, and the union can be only spiritual, a union in intent, a perfect unanimity. If it were more than that, it would not be a moral union at all, but a material fusion in the dark, with a total extinction of spirit. Everybody achieves that substantial union by dying and being dissolved into cosmic energy and the flux of change. It is a consummation, in some cases, devoutly to be wished. We may thereby turn into potentiality of many better thing than ever we were actually. Yet that better thing in its day and spirit in any of its instances can exist only by distinction, not only by distinguishing one essence from another in intuition, but by distinguishing one object or eventuality from another in appetition, aspiration, and love. The truth and the universe will enter into this union only under the form of the good, that is to say, insofar as they contribute by support and by denial to define both the adored and the attainable good. both religion and politics, but it is with the good only that union is good, and only with the good that it is spiritually possible. Union with anything less or with anything more kills the hope that was to be brought to perfection and damns the soul that was to be saved. One point, a fundamental point, is thus settled in our inquiry. The union sought by a liberated spirit is no fusion of its substance with any other substance, but a moral unanimity or fellowship with the life of all substances, insofar as they support or enlarge its own life. This first conclusion also arms us with a thread of spiritual security in our wandering through the labyrinth of religions and philosophies. Our steps turn towards discovering the real or articulating the possible with no reference to the good. Then, in our philosophic dream, we may accompany great naturalists and subtle logicians through unending windings. The eye may range over prospects vastly discursive or intensely concentrated. We may summon spirits and work magic, but the will in us will never swerve from its first animal direction, from blind craving or idle play. We shall be studying matter or essence, but not harmony. In these reaches, we shall find the peripatetic Aristotle, the reasoning Parmenides, the Stoics, Spinoza, and Hegel, all naturalists and historians and their ultimate allegiance, and never more so than when they raise pure intelligibles or sheer substance or infinite existence into a supreme idol. They may call it God, but it is still a fact or truth that they are worshipping, not excellence. Or, weary of that pursuit, we may turn down other paths, less stately and trodden, but more fragrant, where the poets walk. At the end, not far distant, since repentance follows close upon love, we may find some saint in his hermitage, or some cynic in his den, or perhaps Epicurus in his little walled garden. Here every alley will be blind, with no thoroughfare. We must turn back into the maze, or stay with these solitaries forever. But the thread in our hands may not be broken, and may encourage us to look further. And finally, we shall not fail to reach the very center of the labyrinth, where there is a great marvel. Nature replanned into a green temple for the mind. Here dignified priests officiate, Pythagoras, Plato, Plotinus, while in a rival sanctuary, the fathers of the church vehemently preach and gesticulate. Apart in wider spaces, the Indian teachers sit cross-legged and sleepy, each in his little shrine, and Buddha under his bo tree. With the thread we hold fast, the pledge of our safety and sanity, while it suffers us to approach all these arbors, grottos, and artificial rockeries. Will not allow us to enter any of them. If we attempt to step nearer, it pulls us back. Pure good is not worshipped here. Actual good, which can only be a consummation, a smile suddenly breaking out on the face of nature, or some great gift of fortune to the heart, here is magically materialized into a fantastic monument. Not a good realized, but a new set of conditions imposed upon the spirit. The good, falsely petrified, is inverted into a power, limiting the possibilities of the good. Power here bribing us to accept something not perfect, there forbidding us to love and to praise the inalienably beautiful. But fortunately, we were only dreaming. This inverted universe is in fact undiscoverable and non-existent. Those revealed histories were but fables, contrived for the sake of their moral. Inspiration no doubt invented them well, and they in turn may have inspired many a holy life. But the spell once broken, those deceived passions become mere pantomime, and those doctrines dead words. It remains for us to pluck the secret out of that dream and to trace our guiding thread back to the living Ariadne who spun it. This Ariadne is the human soul. It is only the psyche that can conceive a good, or can love it, or can uphold or misguide the spirit in the pursuit of that good. An original theologian is but a poeticizing moralist, and the mystic who thinks he is becoming one with the deity is simply purifying himself and learning to see all things from the point of view of the spirit. For that reason, those pious philosophers do not altogether waste their time studying their fabulous universes, for they are but reversed images of the spiritual life, and the deeper the devotee penetrates into their magic economy, the better he learns to know his own heart. He becomes very much wiser, in spite of his fables, than the positivist who rails at them as invented physics, without understanding the moral secret of those inventions. Yet truth conveyed by a fiction is an ambiguous good, and if it deepens our insight in one direction, it is in danger of misleading us in another. The bigoted positivist who ignores the existence of his own spirit is unwittingly doing the spirit a clear service. He is not an endeavor to be edifying, yet his views, in their externality and darkness, may serve staunchly for edification, by leading the spirit to a more complete disillusion, a simpler hope, and a greater liberty. The spirit does not need a universe composed of pure spirits. It needs a world that will suffer spirit to live in it. Now, with gods conceived as powers, or with the real powers that they personify, a spirit seeking the good may make alliances and compromises. It may offer propitiation and undertake service with the hope of reward. These are the normal expedients of primitive religion. The calculation is provincial, the aim preliminary, and the alliance political. There is no moral union involved, and the powers addressed are respected as much for being dangerous as for being friendly. Therefore, when loyalty is merely political, it remains conditional and essentially unstable. It is an accidental method of securing our personal ends. Yet, since the psyche is plastic, an imposed subjection to some constant calculable power may grow into an easy habit and a happy allegiance. The servants of a great king once annexed pride to their servitude and ambition to their loyalty. The power of the kingdom and the glory of their master become indistinguishable in their minds from their own safety, profit, and eminence. Nature in this way sometimes overflows calculation and restores spontaneity, where there was at first some ungenerous artifice. So polite language turns to wit, labor to art, superstition to religious devotion, and the ultimate goal is touched unexpectedly in the midst of a tedious journey. The journey continues, but now free from haste and from despair, since the goal is known to be always at hand, not before us, but within. In fine, a spiritual good does not cease to be spiritual because matter supplies it, or a humble occasion. We may eat and drink to the glory of God, but when, and in what sense? And when may the arts and sacrifices imposed on us by external forces become free arts and fresh vocations? I reply, when the psyche has undergone a radical readaptation to the facts, so that in living in harmony with them, it can live in harmony with itself. This is genuine conversion or metanoia, a true education and discipline that, in trimming away all excrescencies and parasitic growths, allows the plant to shoot up straight to its predestined flower. We see signs of this when asceticism is joyful, limitation avowed, labor interested in its function and excellence, with the heart detached from the issue and set on no particular event, and we see signs of the opposite when the will is merely cowed and suppressed provisionally, the original passions remaining alive under banked fires and watching for some partial or mock satisfaction. Overt life, social life, then becomes one vast hypocrisy, all duties forced, all virtues conscious, all work sullen and unwilling and bargained for in terms of some irrelevant reward. Something of this ugly lining is visible even in the pursuit of spiritual perfection, when that pursuit is systematic, since conversion is seldom so thorough as wholly to purify the unregenerate will, and some strictly virtuous people are so artificially good that it is only in their lighter and unguarded moments that they are at all tolerable or at all spiritual. The two meanings of the English word light in this respect seem not wholly divergent, because in order that spirit may be wholly luminous, it must be also imponderable. The creaking of a motor must not be heard in its flight. Union cannot be attained by sacrificing integrity. With inner integrity, a spirit might live in moral harmony with chaos, as the romantic spirit thinks it can live. The only trouble being that chaos can never breed a firm spirit, or any spirit at all, so that your romantic hero draws all his strength from the natural order that he despises, and dreams of a congenial chaos only because his own integrity is shaky and diseased. But admitting in a myth that a perfect spirit could exist facing a chaotic world, that spirit would make no further claims on that world and would find no fault with it. It would positively love that disorderly order, no matter how many torments and mutual hatreds might be involved. And this tragic exultation, like that of the Stoics, Calvinists, and Hegelians, would not become cruel or egotistical unless, in view of his own Olympian peace, the philosopher denied that the world was a great evil to the world, and tolerable only to a spirit that had overcome and renounced it. A solution easy enough for the fabulous Olympians, but almost unattainable to actual spirit incarnate in that very world. Thus we see that it is easier for a free spirit to live in charity and peace with an evil society than for a distracted spirit to tolerate the most perfect universe. Solitude is morally the most social of states, since it knows no enemies, and the concentration it allows equalizes distances, material and moral, and places the spirit at its own source, from which flow all the radiating varieties of moral life, none of which then seem unnatural or alien. Inwardness makes moral scope possible, the experience obtainable externally being a mere annexation of casual views without insight or moral understanding. Moving time and endless evolution cannot survey themselves. They struggle and grope along from moment to moment, ignorant of what they were or are going to be, and incapable at each point of conceiving the burden of any other. They can be surveyed only by virtue of a quickened sensibility, lodged in particular places within that flux, where long range organs play upon long range instincts and unused potentialities in the psyche. Every affection of the organism may then become a perspective for the spirit. There might seem to be a paradox in the love of truth and in being spiritually exalted by the spectacle of an evil world. If spirit were a power, its first concern would indeed be to reform this world, unless it should falter in that endless task to sharpen and stiffen its own demands, so that the existence of any evil in the world should never pass as a matter of course and excusable, much less that evil should come to seem an entertaining and pleasant thing. or a necessary shadow and relief to the highlights of virtue. The least blot should then fill the spirit to all eternity with an irreconcilable horror. But spirit is not responsible for the world. It is the world that is responsible for the spirit and guilty of often tormenting it to no purpose. Yet this happens, so to speak, only by mistake, since consciousness, by its very existence, marks a vital if imperfect harmony already achieved in nature, and the imperfection of this harmony cannot be perceived unless the potentiality and need of harmony were at work, impatient to make it perfect. Partial failure is inevitable, because the life of spirit is only a small part of the world's life, and not synchronous with those wider vibrations. Spirit cannot be the world, it can only think the world, and this function of thinking has conditions that are local and specific. There must be integrity and clear sensibility in some animal psyche. Such perfection of function brings an inner light and happiness. Truth, in the appropriate terms and relevant measure, has been discovered and defined, and this truth is a pure good for the spirit. No matter what disorder, conflict, or dangers in regard to spirit itself the discovery may reveal. Storms are not appalling to the spirit, nor even death. What is appalling is only inner contradiction, delusion, and madness hugging its own torments. Integrity banishes all that, and it renders the truth life-giving and refreshing, like pure air and the solid earth. This spiritual love of the truth is not love of what the world loves, and therefore not hatred of what the world hates, but is understanding of both those passions. It is therefore a kind of love for the world, a pitying and forgiving insight into its loves, such as the fratricidal world is incapable of feeling towards itself, but such as we might imagine that God would feel for it. He would not adopt the passions of his creatures. He would not be like a perfectly wise and infinitely sensitive tragic poet, holding all those passions in suspense as possible sentiments, and seeing their interplay and their moral issue, things to which they themselves, except in some ultimate moment, will remain blind. Many an old philosopher and theologian has denied that God, if conceived to be pure spirit, could love the world or could have created it. It could only be some Demiurgos, himself a natural wild being full of fatal passions and limitations, that could have contrived so many ingenious ways of using or circumventing the forces of matter, and could have nursed a fatherly fondness for his work, and a tendency to pull his two hapless creatures out of the traps that he had covertly laid for them. That seems speculatively correct, yet the notion of God as pure spirit is religiously inadequate. The God of religion must be also a power, the fundamental power in the universe, controlling our destiny, and he must also be the truth or the logos, that specific contingent pattern which this power imposes on existence. I'll return to this point later. Here, taking spirit as we find it in ourselves, we may readily see in what sense it cannot help loving the world, cannot help at once enjoying it and pitying it, and wishing to save the spirits that inhabit it from the troubles they endure. In the first place, is not spirit an emanation of animal life? How then should it not enjoy breathing and eating and fighting and loving? How should it not enjoy the sights and sounds that arouse it and stimulate it to fix the terms in which all its thinking will flow? Here, then, inseparable from the movement of the world, we find the pleasures of emotion and of perception, pleasures intrinsically spiritual. The vital dependence of spirit on nature involves a responsive affection towards nature on the part of spirit, and this affection, as just now explained, will survive all the buffets of fortune so long as the power to think, to observe, or even to protest remains in the spirit. the very badness of the world being a fountain of eloquence and a free mind. Yet, in the second place, love is an exacting passion, and we cannot willingly allow the object of it to be less than perfect. When imperfection, folly, or shame invade that object, love turns into suffering. Shall we deny the facts? Shall we excuse and adopt them, betraying our own honor and conscience, rather than forsake our darlings? Yet, what would these darlings be without the charms that we found in them? Shall we detach our love altogether from existing beings and platonically worship only universal ideas of the beautiful and the good? This might be wisdom or spiritual insight, but is it love? And can such sublimation really be professed without hypocrisy? Could it be realized without a mortal chill benumbing the heart? If ever we have ceased to suffer, have we not ceased to love? Whence it follows that a pure spirit that loved all the good would necessarily suffer with all the sufferers, since they suffer only because they are deprived of something that has become for them a need and a good. Union with the good might then seem impossible and self contradictory, since it involves participation in all evil and in all loss of the good. And it is very true that the union with the good, with all good freed from all evil, becomes possible only by the prior renunciation of all impossible or contradicted desires. We must first let the sorrow involved in love correct the love that is vowed to sorrow, not by denying the natural charm of those contradicted sweets, but by not pursuing them or demanding them wherever the natural will does, or where, at a later moment, it would curse itself for having obtained them. This necessity establishes the double level of moral life, here natural, there spiritual, and it is only at the spiritual level that perfect union with the good is possible. Union with it at the natural level being precarious, blind, and almost always infected with suffering, remorse, and injustice. Remorse and injustice. These two levels are not to be conceived as separated like heaven and earth, or lived in by different persons. There are moral levels within each life, often within one moment, when we partly tremble at our predicament or that of our friends, and partly accept our fate and admire their virtues. Our love of the world is natural in so far as it rests on kinship and contagion. It becomes spiritual in so far as it grows disinterested, looks before and after, and discriminates the dead loss from the clear gain. When sympathy with the world reaches the spiritual level, it receives a Christian name and is called charity. This charity is seldom pure or universal, but touches home sentiments with more or less spiritual light. We see this in the slowness and hesitation with which the notion of charity was first distinguished. In later Judaism and early Christianity, there was a fervent spirituality of the heart, but the intellect had not discerned the nature of spirit and looked for a miraculous transformation of this world into a celestial society. It was the speedy coming of this mythical revolution that inspired the quite unworldly and ascetic practice of charity that we find praised in the first epistle to the Corinthians. There was prudence, there was speculative joy in renouncing this world when this world was dissolving, and in making ready for the next, where only the converted would be admitted. Being forgiven, it was easy to forgive, to be patient, to succor all, and to think evil of none. But such charity was unawares an inner initiation into that new spiritual order which was expected to burst so dramatically into public existence. It involved detachment from all that made the glory of earth, not only from the glories of the heathen or of the natural man, but even from those of the saints, when they were filled with gifts such as prophecy, working miracles, or speaking with tongues, which, though called gifts of the Spirit, were grossly physical or demonic faculties. These were worthless spiritually without charity, without the insight that renders love universal, and the humility that accepts all homely cares, forgives all injuries, and, without disclaiming eminence where there is eminence, knows that it is no private possession, but a gift of grace. Spirit is not essentially seated more in one man than in another, and in all suffers semi-darkness and tribulation. In all it has an equal need of salvation and an equal capacity for it. Respect for persons and their gifts is worldly. So is enthusiasm for their ambitions. These are seductions for the spirit, blinding it to the simplicity of the good and of the true love of it. If thus charity is sympathy with universal will, it is a sympathy doubly chastened, first by understanding and then by renunciation. The world is seen to be, in one sense, innocent. Its great sin is original sin, the sin of being a spontaneous world, self-contradicting and ignorant of its destiny. And this predicament runs deep to the very center of the heart. There is no spark of will anywhere that circumstances might not blow up into the greatest crimes, and the world falls into no error, the roots of which might not be found in any soul, so that charity implies repentance, not for this or that slip, but radically for willing otherwise than as God wills. Therefore, the true saint unaffectedly thinks himself the greatest of sinners, because he finds in himself, in so far as he is himself and not pure spirit, the potentiality of all sins. Yet this sinfulness calls for grace and deserves it, because there is still spirit in it and hunger for the good. To blame nature uncharitably is not to understand the circumstantial origin of evil. Law and morality must needs punish and suppress natural will whenever it transgresses the prevalent order of society. And they can trace this transgression no further back than to the voluntary acts or thoughts of particular persons who may be fined, imprisoned, executed, or at least banished from good company. But these are stopping places, conceived on a gross human scale. Responsibility and freedom no doubt lodge in persons as they do in every contingent unit arising in this contingent world. But for a speculative eye, the obliquity of those initiatives is not inherent, nor the evil absolute and all on one side. The world is as evil for the natural will as the natural will is evil for the world. The true sin is cosmic and constitutional, it is the heritage of chaos. This is the sin of which spirit is the innocent victim, which it expiates with undeserved sufferings, and from which it is redeemed if those sufferings and its own insight avail to detach it from the natural will altogether, not by abolishing that will, since then spirit would be abolished, but by understanding it and its self-contradictions. To have passed in this way to the spiritual level is the first prerequisite of charity. Love here walks hand in hand with renunciation, not followed by renunciation after love has been disappointed, but clarified by renunciation at its very dawn. Not having any stake in the contest, the will expressed in spirit can rehearse all the other passions, which are not this intelletto de amore, this understanding and this lesson of passion. Love, when so universalized and so disentangled, can forgive all injuries, endure all injustice, malice, or madness, and this not by an affected meekness, as if one begged to be trodden upon, but intelligently, justly, in the light of truth. The initial aspiration of life is everywhere innocent, the perfection of it would everywhere be beautiful, and everything is disfigured only by confusion, inopportuneness, and a hostile fate. That which is here and now impossible, impossible forever for me, must be renounced, but it remains a good, it cannot be detested without blindness. It may have its day in eternity. Charity is a love that outlives defeat and foresees it, that embraces death and is immortal, a love not demanding the impossible, nor imagining the false, but knowing the intentions of the heart in each instance, disregarding the rest, and not despising the least spark of spirit in the cinders. Charity comes to assist or modify some work already afoot, or one that the natural will might prompt or might welcome, but the motive is different. Animal passions are claims to possession or extensions of self love to wife, children, kindred, or party. The psyche expands and operates in a wider field, but remains an animal psyche. Love remains a pursuit, a need, a demand, and is represented in the spirit, if at all, by desire or anxiety, that is, by some form of distraction. Only if at some moment that natural will is fulfilled is the spirit liberated, and does love attain to union. But union for the spirit cannot lie in physical possession or in material expansion of its domain, things which impose more problems than they solve. Union for the spirit can be nothing but presence, nor need this presence be uninterrupted. Presence to it anywhere, full presence, is virtual presence to it everywhere else. Its treasure is laid up in heaven, that is to say, in its own depths. Spiritual love is therefore not anxious, and is entirely free from desire. It lives in the virtual presence of all the fulfillments and all the possibilities that the natural will pursues. The world appreciates charity and finds it cooperative when remedial action is requisite and the will is trying to recuperate from its follies. Yet morally, a spiritual temperament has its pros and cons, like any other temperament. But monarchs who have been spiritual men, Marcus Aurelius, St. Louis, Henry VI, have been unfortunate politically. Their heart was not in the conduct of affairs, yet they were not strong enough to recognize their true vocation. A greatly inspired prophet like Buddha would have at once renounced his throne and his family. Even this might not have sufficed. The professed and professional prophet is sometimes entangled in a worse net than a king. He may be led into self assertion, into denunciations, into controversy. He may find himself working repeated miracles and inspiring fables that he must wink at. He will probably be utterly misunderstood. A sect betraying his thought, if not his person, will follow at his heels. Martyrdom, in such a case, could not be an escape. It would turn him into a myth, into an idol. His spirit would be dead, and more solitary in the other world than it had been in this, while here his bones would be encrusted in jewels. Books, laws, and traditional religions, supposed to embody the spirit, are parts of the world. Their effect is compounded of 1,000 influences, alien to one another. Undoubtedly, even in their midst, as anywhere in the midst of nature, spirit may be reborn. Perhaps a docile, intelligent spirit that can avail itself of all symbols without worshipping any fetish, but more probably a spirit soured and made wrathful by those very fossils of spirit. The world then takes sides in spiritual quarrels, or rather introduces quarrels of its own into that spiritual life, which in itself would be free from all human partiality. If charity be a universal spiritual sympathy with the world, how does it seem so contrary to more than half the impulses that flourish there? Only because intelligent sympathy halts wherever one good conflicts with another, and this arrest is a consequence of universal sympathy, not a contradiction to it. As in a complex psyche or a complex world, almost all passions are competitive and hostile to one another. Charity is reduced to befriending them rather when they are down than when they are up, because when wounded and helpless and already suffering for its rashness, a creature ceases to be aggressive, and its enemies would be vindictive and fiendish if they still continued to assail it. They can afford to leave it alone to its involuntary penance, and charity can then step in with its double work of mercy, corporal and alleviating suffering, spiritual and rendering suffering a means of salvation. This is the rationale of that check which a superstitious moralism would impose on all natural will. To check any living being for the sake of checking it would be diabolical. The hypertrophy of egotism. When one movement of will not only asserts itself absolutely against all others, but declares that all others are wicked and ought never to have existed. Moral passion shouts about right and wrong, applying to ends terms proper only to means. That is the feminine eloquence of the psyche, blind to everything but her home interests. To reason and to charity, this prejudice is nonsense. It amounts to saying that some goods are good and other goods are bad. All are good, but not all are compatible in the same family. Goodwill, on the contrary, is the disinterested sympathy of one will with another, a natural sympathy in kindred beings where there is affinity in their wills, but requiring spiritual insight before it can turn into sympathy with aliens and enemies. The infusion of this insight into natural goodwill has observable stages. A mother will defend her young with ferocity. Their bodies are extensions of her own. Their psyches are colonies of her psyche, and she will passionately forget herself in serving them, as the hand forgets itself in defending the eyes. But as the young grow older, they become less a part of the mother's life. She will scold, beat, and enslave them. She will grow jealous and sarcastic about their separate interests. If she were not human and bound to them by economic and legal ties, she might even lose them in the crowd of young ruffians and not know them for her children. Nor is it otherwise in friendship, where there seems to be no material bond. Friendship is a union in play, in adventure, in war. It is essentially exclusive, clannish, founded on sympathies that are common antipathies to all that is different. A comradeship prized for being segregation, cut off by special tastes and powers from the rest of the world. Manly friendship is based on physical affinity, as brotherhood is, only that instead of being passive, hereditary, and often annoying, it is freely chosen and tested in common action and adventure and in community of thought. It flourishes on sympathy, not confidence, in matters of love and honor. Personal reserve and idiosyncrasy are accepted tacitly and always respected, make no difference in the common field, and are gladly felt to exist beyond it. A friend is not the keeper of his friend's souls. Mutual liability is limited, but within the field of their common life and virtue, they feel sure of one another, and this confidence, when well tried, may be not untouched with admiration. And here a spiritual element may supervene. Friends may club together in cultivating music or philosophy as they might in mountain climbing. Yet if the common ideal object predominates over the social occasions with their incidental humors, the original personal atmosphere gradually becomes transparent, indifferent, and finally disturbing. Friendship is at an end, and each must try the wine press alone. Even in the mountain climbing, the supreme moments are solitary. Comradeship reigns in the projects, the dangers, and the irrelevant human incidents. Exclusiveness and pugnacity appear also in all intellectual, political, and religious bodies, called bodies not without unconscious wit. They glow with local affections, with privilege, with scorn and hatred of the damnable outsider. If ever some ray of speculative spirit or universal charity pierces those enclosures, friendship is saddened, party is transcended, religion can be endured only as a human convention, and nationality as a physical accident. Whatever measure of truth, beauty, or happiness there may have been in those associations is not denied or diminished, but the heart has traveled beyond, and it is only in an infinite landscape transfiguring their values that they continue to be prized. What was before lived is now understood, and this understanding is a second life in another sphere. For this reason, personal friendships and cliques are discouraged in the cloister. They are distracting and equivocal. Charity should extend equally to all the brethren, without favoritism or attachment. Not that affection is anything but natural and generous, but in the spiritual life it is accidental, as are also the particular doctrines and cults of any religion. They are to be accepted as we have to accept ourselves, not as goals but as points of departure. When we come to a spiritual communion of poets, philosophers, or saints, it is avowedly the divine grace, truth, or beauty flowing through those human channels, and not the human channels that we profit by and embrace. So much so that all important spiritual figures necessarily become mythical even when they were originally historical. If they resist this transformation, they become irrelevant to their spiritual mission. As Shakespeare, the man, is irrelevant to the poetic world that we find in his plays. The creation of mythical heroes seems deceptive only to the pedant who insists on proving them historical or proving them unhistorical. To spirit, those noumena are true, as the gods are, since the real source of influence in both cases is some diffuse cosmic power at work in the dark and exciting these graphic images in the mind. We therefore conceive plastically and love as kindred beings and charitable powers, the powers that actually liberate spirit in ourselves. They make for the good, or, as we say, the good works through them. This last, if pressed too literally, becomes not thinkable, since the good is a result of harmony in the workings of power. Yet this power often serves the good, which therefore may dramatically be called its master, commanding its own realization. There is a school of theology that would clip the wings of love so as to prevent it from ascending and make it always descend. Love of the good, they say, is self-centered and erotic. By it, we aspire greedily to something that we might enjoy, to the perfection of our own being, in the possession or presence of something that, for us, is the good. Charity, on the contrary, searches out the victims of evil, like divine grace, poured out regardless of merit, and dedicates itself to their service. Forgetting self, it labors to relieve and instruct others. In a word, these moralists see charity in Martha, a hard-working evangelical Christian, but in Mary they see only a corrupt enthusiast of the Greek decadence, absorbed in the passions of her own battered soul. In one sense, unselfish love is not only possible but primitive. The will is directed upon its objects by nature, without any calculation of satisfactions to accrue or torments to be avoided. But it is perfectly impossible that any love should exist, not rooted in a psyche, and not directed upon an object chosen and pursued by spontaneous will. There is therefore no love not directed upon the good, not directed upon something that makes for the fulfillment of the lover's nature. This good may be the good of others, but doing good to others will, to that extent, be a good for oneself. Or shall we say that a social life involving friendliness and a sense of duty is in itself nobler than self-help? If the monkeys agreed always to pick the vermin from one another's skins and never from their own, the operation would indeed have become social, but the benefit would remain private. Amiable as the impulse may be to benefit others, this impulse would be cruelly stultified if no benefit could be really conferred. And it is only because will is already directed upon life, health, food, and liberty that the ministrations of intelligent charity are a benefit and not a nuisance. If to pursue the good be pronounced selfish, the most unselfish charity will be openly serving the selfishness of our neighbors and secretly serving our own. Perhaps, however, the good that charity aims to bestow might be no other than charity itself, the greatest thing in the world being love. By diffusing love without any other benefit, we should be saving the world. But should we? Flattered as everyone would be by the idea of being loved and full of ready love in return, yet if it were impossible to benefit anybody, the whole world would be tormented by a perpetual desire to do good and a hopeless inability to do it. But perhaps we may here be the victims of an ambiguity in the word love. Love may mean loving actions, or it may mean the emotion of love. Now, the emotion of love might be diffused universally, even if no positive natural goods could be secured for society. But then love would be a vapid sentiment. Yet, this is the happiness that the sentimental saviors of the world seem to be pursuing, thinking themselves disciples of St. Paul or even of Christ. They have removed all disillusion and asceticism from their notion of charity, all austerity from their love, and have become, in reality, disciples of Rousseau. The position becomes even more precarious if we extend it to theology. That God is love is an orthodox saying, and even if God were essentially power rather than love, in one sense, love would be involved in his being, for power selects what it shall do, and this selection marks a preference and a kind of love. When the Creator said, "Let there be light," he exerted power, yet the direction in which he exerted it betrayed an innate affection and proved that he loved light. The book of Genesis represents God as an artist, loving the world and idea before he had brought it into existence. But a world, like a child, has a life of its own and may soon begin to wander from the parental intention. The parent may even be tempted to disown his offspring. Yet the artist, even if disappointed in his work, remembers the Platonic idea that first inspired him and still feels its magic. He will be inclined to preserve the erring thing, to be revised and corrected. So we learn that God has resumed his labors, this time not to create the world, but to redeem it. The absolute artist has been softened into a forgiving father, a miraculous physician, a patient teacher, even a proprietary victim. God's love of the world has become charity. Arabian subtlety has known how to refine on these intuitions and to maintain that creation itself was a work of charity. Allah is continually called the merciful and the compassionate, even when his decrees are most severe, and there might seem to be a voluntary one-sidedness in these epithets, seeing that Muslim theology makes Allah absolutely omnipotent. How should universal will be moved by charity when there can be nothing outside to succor or to love? The psyche is not moved by charity to fashion the body, or to react with a healing power on diseases and wounds, nor is spontaneous unanimity between various psyches an instance of charity. It is not charity that leads a crew to pull together in a race or in a storm. Nevertheless, we are told that charity moved the Creator to make the world, because non-existence is the worst of metaphysical evils and the most necessitous. Allah, therefore, took pity on the unwedded essences of things, and entirely without any claims or merits on their part, married them to existence. The worst of monsters and of torments has this to be thankful for, that at least it exists. We may smile at such an ambiguous mercy, yet the principle that giving is blessing, whether the gift were needed or not, has a great vogue in religion and in society, and even when the gift is needed, the question remains whether the need itself was not an evil. The prayer book thanks God for our creation, yet in being created, we receive nothing but needs, with no assurance that they would be satisfied. For what is our organic will, our psyche, but a vast concourse of needs, some urgent, others latent, but brewing and rendering us fundamentally unhappy? Common sense is blunted to such unremitting perceptions, and takes for granted our existence, our needs, and our desire to satisfy them. And on this basis, we may unfeignedly ask Providence, or Fortune, or the charity of mankind for any aid in satisfying them, however inadequate. Charity has more insight into nature than conscience or self-interest can have. It understands the innocence of contrary wills and the goodness of contrary goods. For this reason, charity seems unnatural or supernatural to the conventional mind. It rebukes in assisting, but if no will can be unreservedly abated by charity, this happens only because natural wills are in conflict. For although some of them involve worse consequences than others, even the best involve consequences that are unfortunate in some direction. Human wisdom cannot consider everything or really look to the end, and charity must begin at home and never lose its moorings there. Therefore, it is always quick to relieve bodily distress. To relieve suffering in anyone's body is an immediate mercy to the spirit there, and can hardly be an immediate injury to the spirit in anyone else. For the same reason, charity gives alms, even when rational economy might hold back, because the benefit is clear, even if undeserved, and the detachment just, even if ill-timed. Thus, charity is a second birth of love, aware of many wills and many troubles. It is not creative or constructive of anything positive, unless it be hospitals and almshouses. Institutions produce rival ambitions, rights, and contentions about all plans and projects. Charity is disenchanted and sure only of the ever-present propriety of charity itself. If, in saying that God is love, we understand that God is charity, we are led to certain consequences, perhaps unwelcome to theology. For if the whole essence of deity were bounty, evidently the Creator could not exist without the creation. And if the whole essence of deity were mercy, God would depend for his existence on the existence of suffering and sin. These implications are pantheistic. They are incompatible with Christianity, the religion of charity. But a more insidious consequence follows. If the impulse to give and to help were the very spirit of God, the occasion and demand for such charity being presupposed naturalistically, what would God be but goodness in ourselves in so far as we are good? This insight may rather satisfy a moralistic and mystical piety, as the pantheistic insight satisfies dialectical wit. But if we say that God is nothing but the brotherly love that we feel for one another, it is clear that we are atheists. Neither the animal psyche nor the good to which the psyche aspires can ever be banished from morals. The psyche introduces the element of preference, the distinction between good and evil, success and failure, and the good is thus set in its ideal place as the goal and perfection of a natural life. If we call this vital aspiration eros, which is its ancient poetic name, we may say that charity is a form of eros, and thoroughly erotic, for if it were not erotic, it would not be a psychic force, nor a passion of the spirit. What turns eros into charity is reason, recollection, comparison, justice. The great tragedy of eros is its blindness. Remove the blindness produced by a too narrow and intense light. Remove the bandage that turned vision into dreams, and eros is charity itself, the pursuit of all good, guided by all knowledge. Now sympathy with all good and attention to all knowledge are not possible to an animal psyche in its physical action. They enter the field only as ideals of the spirit evoked by the psyche, in the act of becoming sensitive to some sympathy and to some knowledge, correcting a first impulse in consequence. The psyche creates the principle of a rational conscience, or of universal justice. The universality of both sympathy and knowledge is posited initially, but never attained in act. Yet charity, as also science, lives in the light of that ideal. Truth far outruns actual knowledge, or any experience possible to any individual or any species of living beings. And charity far outruns any actual code of politics or morality. Charity extends to all animals and, as the Indians tell us, to all gods, whatever gods there may be, because existence of every type involves difficulty and imperfection, defeat and essential impermanence, so that everywhere existence deserves compassion and demands transmutation into eternal terms. This the spirit performs instinctively, wherever it can, clearing the gold everywhere from the dross and laying it up for an eternal treasure. How is this possible? How shall we be united, even in spirit, with a good that is absent? How recognize a truth inexpressible in our language, or be at peace with a power that is perhaps destroying us? There is a way. It is prayer. Prayer seems sheer foolishness to the world, and rather a puzzle to the materially pious. Why pray? An indoctrinated child may ask, when God loves us, when he knows everything, and when he has already decided what he will do. And the only answer might seem to be the one given in my first Spanish catechism to any hard question. The church has doctors that will know how to explain it. We may smile, but in this case, the explanation is really at hand if what the doctors are not. We can distinguish the spirit from the psyche, or in the Christian language, the other world from this world. In this world, or for the psyche, prayer is an instrumentality, and it cannot be efficacious except magically if incantations or the unspoken desires of the heart could compel the powers of nature to obey our commands. This is what superstition expects and asserts, even in the most modern psychology. But for a spiritual religion, the idea of compelling God or compelling matter by magic words or by tears to do as we wish is sacrilegious. Magic does not begin to be prayer until it leaves the issue in God's hands and reconciles itself beforehand to a denial of the need or the hope expressed. It is not expressed for the preposterous purpose of changing the will of God or causing nature to revise the contingency of things, which seen from within is freedom and seen from above is fate. It flows out spontaneously from the fullness of the heart in confession and reflection and prophetic vistas, in resigned and transmuting union with the truth and with the different infinite good at first hidden from the eyes. In his lifelong prayer, the reflective man need not be especially inclined to address petitions to heaven. Rational prayer is not a means but an end. Petitions enter into prayer inevitably, because its language is a social language, and the spirit has a direction in which it wishes to move, so that it lives in perpetual alternative between I would and I would not. It therefore can hardly conceive anything without gladness or aversion, and this vital bias comes to clearness, as all things come to clearness, in prayer. Yet in prayer, all these wishes and sorrows are uttered in the felt presence of omnipotent power and eternal truth, so that all preferences are, as it were, suspended and neutralized by the sense of dependence and by the virtual acceptance of the perhaps contrary fact. The very expression, "Thy will be done," which breathes resignation, also defines a hope. The will of God, on the one hand, means whatsoever happens. On the other hand, it means that which ought to happen. In the latter sense, it seems as yet not to be done on earth as it is in heaven, and the kingdom of God seems not yet to have come. But this postponement, too, must be according to God's will in the first sense, and if it were not, we should not implore Him to shorten the interval and to deliver us from evil. If the will of God be not conceived as omnipotent, that being too pantheistic for a political religion, and if events are determined in part by the free will of other agents, the ultimate union to be attained in prayer would not be union with God, but with the entire moral society of the universe. With this totality, we should have to settle our ultimate accounts, dynamic and ideal, since it would be this conjunction of free agencies, with our own included, that would determine the total destiny and truth of things. A moral theism, in denying that God is omnipotent, would still have left omnipotence the ultimate court of appeal, and this court would not be composed merely of the sundry free agents visible within it, but also, and most importantly, of the manner and time of their conjunction and its effects. Now, these conjunctions and effects of various free wills are contingent to any one of them and a primary fatality for them all. Yet these unintended conjunctions and results are conceived in orthodox theology to have been foreseen and accepted by God at the creation of the world. so that his will seems to be double. As the designer and ultimate sanction of destiny, God wills whatsoever happens, but as lawgiver, merciful Savior, and moral judge, he wills us, for instance, to do not those things which we do, but those which we ought to have done, so that his moral and redeeming will is only one strand in his total handiwork. But the language of prayer should not be pressed as if, when we are living the life of spirit in its full freedom and transcendence, we were still bargaining and plotting in a social and diplomatic world. In expressing our needs and our sorrows, we do not ask ourselves whether we are calling on the Almighty to will what He does not will, or whether we are calling on ourselves to contradict our moral aspirations and to think our evil good. We are probably doing neither. We are recollecting, digesting, purifying our conscience. Essentially, we are addressing nobody. The names and forms of the gods are as mutable as our necessities. Even when we are expressing a wish, we are doing so in the face of the truth, or of fate impersonally, considering how excellent it would be if fortune came to our assistance. We pray as spontaneously as we curse, and cry, "Would to God," without any theory of divine government. The same exclamation, "Ojalá," is even more familiar in Spain, meaning, "May Allah will it." If the Muslims, the most prayerful and most manly of men, sometimes abstain from petitions as irreverent, they could not abstain from desire, and their most unfeigned prayer was not to God, but concerning God. They could not suppress the feeling how beautiful the beautiful would be if it came true. And among us now, there are good people who pray there may be a God to pray to. Moreover, sincere prayer need not affect that hushed tone and demure attitude which we associate with religious devotion in modern times. The spirit may often be sorrowful, but when it thinks, when it dominates, it cannot be afraid. Prayer is essentially ratio, the eloquence of destiny. It contains the whole free comment, lament, and jubilation of the spirit, challenging its fate. A continual contrite reconsideration of all things, for a prayer for which memory and hope supply the materials, so that prayer, as a sincere spirit may utter it, abounds in regrets, praises, aspirations, laughter, and curses, but all transposed from the plane of action to that of reflection and prophecy. Omnipotent power and eternal truth mightily sustain this contemplation, rendering it, in so far as it conforms to them, victorious and full of light. Action is not excluded, as it is in the drama. Prayer may easily glow with an assurance of the direction in which omnipotent power, perhaps through our own agency, is carrying the world. We may be fighting with the big battalions, or even leading them, yet in the midst of action, that which is proper to spirit is only observation, wonder, comparison, judgment. What has happened, what is happening, and what is bound to happen fall into a dramatic vista which the prophet, or psalmist, develops eloquently in his prayer, and he judges nothing and promises himself nothing except as the agent and messenger of God. Thus, strange as it may sound to the rationalist who thinks prayer ridiculous, the only perfectly rational form of life For a spirit that has attained self-knowledge is the life of prayer. To this we must come morally in the end, accepting all inevitable evils for the sake of the good still possible. But there is a partial union that the spirit may reach vitally at any moment, as in laughter. Here, there is no acceptance of ultimates, only merriment at present absurdities and deceptions. The Olympians did not pray to fate, they did not care enough for that. But being free and happy, they laughed at existence. There are moments in childhood when spirit breaks through in a clear triumph. Children laugh, they laugh easily, wholeheartedly, at all sorts of things. In laughter, there is a release of tensions, as in play. But the tensions released in play are vital only, and inarticulate, while laughter is provoked by a release from little obsessions about things already familiar. Things and persons are imposing objects to a child. They seem stolidly committed to be and to remain themselves, but they grow more engaging when they change, and still more when they make faces and pretend not to be what they are. Yet the circle of their tricks and of their stories is soon run, and they become prosaic in things and persons. This commitment to remain as they were may make their individuality and force, but for the spirit it is restriction. In reality, that solemnity and dullness in things and persons is a false pretense. Things are not the essences they put forward, they are configurations of a matter that has indefinite potentialities, just as the spirit has. They are configurations of a matter that has indefinite potentialities. Any day, some unforeseen accident will disclose their inside, or their miscalculation of their powers. The gods have always been laughing at them, and now the spirit in us may laugh too. Even in the silliest fun, when a word meant in one sense is taken in another, there is some release from a false restriction, a little flight from one perch to another. But a pun disappoints if it merely drops us at another chance station. Had it been true wit, it would have kept us on the wing. Laughter loses this innocence when children lose theirs and become rancorous. In their boasts and jeers, we see the difference. These grimaces of egotism are forced, cruel, essentially unhappy. Pure laughter is not malicious, not scornful. It is not a triumph of oneself over another, but of the spirit over all selves. It is a joyous form of union with other feats, in which the spirit is victorious. The bubble once pricked, everybody stands on homelier and firmer ground. In passing, there is exultation at having wrung the dirge of something unreal. This pleasure is dear to children, even if a little shrill. They, poor creatures, are being cheated so regularly by their elders, by one another, and by their own fancies, that it is sweet to turn the tables for once, and to mock the solemn fools in return. But the enlightenment of children is apt to be a fresh delusion, destined to end not in laughter, but in tears. And tears are not enlightening. They water the roots of passion in the psyche, and pile up the fruits of karma for the world. It is laughter that liberates once for all from error without taking a new pledge. It therefore unites us freely with whatsoever may truly deserve our troth. Laughter rings the recess bell in school hours, and then perhaps some ugly little seeds of learning, sown in us against our will, spring up beautiful, free, and unrecognized in the playground of the mind. In after years, laughter becomes bitter. We have laughed enough to no purpose, and can no longer laugh merrily at the old comedy of things. One half of us has despaired and smiles sadly at the other half for not having been able to do so. Meanwhile, at all ages, laughter can sink into ribaldry and become the byplay of vice, when vice throws off the mask or wins a trick against its demure enemies. But cynicism is not itself inwardly free. Its professed wit, as in the Roman satirists, is not very witty, being tarnished sometimes by savage zeal and sometimes by a base relish for scandal. Nevertheless, true merriment may anywhere break in unofficially at the shams of vice as at those of virtue, lifting us out of both to the happy level of understanding. Sometimes, however, this music changes its stops and grows solemn. Laughter, for all its innocent spontaneity, is too bodily an affection to be wholly satisfying. It lapses sadly into a blank. The next thing is irrelevant and mutes the impulse. When the elevation can be sustained on a wider view, we no longer laugh, but grow speculative, commemorative, even liturgical. The catharsis found in tragedy is only a solemn, universalized form of the solution that unravels some comic knot and leaves us, for a moment, contented with the world. Elegy also leaves us content, not with some gain, but with all losses. The bourgeois endeavors to explain his love of scandal, of reported crimes, horrors, and ruin by throwing pleasing considerations into the balance, such as his own safety, or the incidental merits of the report, diction, images, or moral lesson. But this is all beside the point. The nature of spirit and the divine allegiances of spirit have not been discerned. Why is the diction poetical, or the imagery sublime, or the moral edifying? Because in those intuitions the spirit triumphs over the triumphs of limitation, error, and death. It is not a question of sugaring the pill, but of drinking the fatal cup to the dregs and being reborn into another life. We should be only lying to ourselves if we pretended that troubles had ceased, or that death was not ultimate. But by being ultimate, death frames all troubles in, completes the picture, removes it to the plane of historic accidents, and renders it an object fit for intuition to rest in. Memento mori may suggest only worms and ghastly corruption. We might say just as well, memento excessi. Remember that you will have lived. Such is the eternity intrinsically native to spirit and visible from each of its moments, be they few or many. The judgment then passed on the spectacle may be favorable or unfavorable, but it is always a sublime judgment, a true last judgment. David and the Sibyl sing forever of the day of wrath, and of the world sunk in ashes, and they are deeply happy. Spirit can never see the truth or conceive it in an actual thought if spirit were not a function of life, and the intuition of eternity must always be a passing or repeated intuition. Now life is a trope in matter, proper to an organism that can restore and reproduce itself. Such life cannot help being precarious. It is inwardly continuous with material processes that outrun it, so that some of its developments will be disruptive and contrary to one another. Life may be killed by life, as it may be stifled by lifeless forces. Therefore, the good that a liberated spirit may embrace cannot be the truth, but at best, some conception of the truth. This will be more than the truth, in being living and emotional, and having an eternal movement from potentiality to act. And it will be immensely less than the truth, in being always partial, intermittent, and subjectively directed. For it is life, raised to the scintillating light of spirit, that notices this rather than that, sets problems, and finds solutions which are privately exciting sense, followed to ends privately gratifying. Whereas the truth displays the whole eternal labyrinth of real relations through which question and answer miss their way 1,000 times for once that they find it. The triumph that inwardly raises spirit to its height is intuition, not knowledge. For when fact and truth have to be regarded, spirit has mortgaged its freedom and is as often depressed as exalted. Therefore, before the truth, or behind it, and intercepting knowledge in 1,000 ways, arises a ghost of that which is not but might have been, something better than the truth, or worse than the truth, and evoked by fear of what the truth may be. And this play of heated imagination, which the truth, if it could speak, might call impertinent, flows from the sources of spirit more directly, and prophesies the good more truly than knowledge could ever do. The function of free intuition is by no means superseded by eventual knowledge. It persists to enlighten the spirit morally about the truth that may have enlightened it intellectually. Truth is contingent, but spirit, being addressed to essence, can rest only in what is necessary, in the form that a form has, and in the inevitable relation of that form to all others. More deeply, therefore, than with the truth, spirit is concerned with conceiving, loving, or hating what might have been true. Spirit speaks not for the truth, or for the intellect alone, by which truth is discovered, but speaks for all life, insofar as life has been perfected and harmonized. Even the intellect is an exercise of this spontaneous or poetic faculty that rebels against the intellect, because the categories of the intellect are variable and vital, like those of language, and knowledge, like any other art, trembles between a good and an evil fate. The fine arts and the traditional religions are vast instruments in the realm of matter that seem to serve the spirit directly, apart from utility or truth, yet even they carry an immense load of impedimenta. All the technical, scientific, historical, social, local, and temporal side of art and religion that absorbs so much blood and ink has nothing to say to the spirit about the good. At best, the ground may be thereby cleared for a free spiritual life, which will begin where those distractions end. I do not mean where they end historically, for they can never end while life in this world continues. I mean where they culminate morally and provisionally and yield their spiritual fruits. These fruits are gathered in moments of insight, recollection, and prayer. They are not probably novel fruits historically, but they are always fresh and spontaneous for the spirit that develops them. They are not discoveries of facts in another world, such as religious dogmas seem to a simple mind to report, or such as the arts of fiction add to common reality, as it were in a dream. We are not divorced from the facts of this world in order to be subjected to the facts of another world, expected to be better. That is an illusion of the animal will, unteachable and bent on trying its luck for the second time. We are divorced by a revelation about the old and familiar facts. and remarried to them by a new charity that understands their hidden virtues and forgives their vices, a revelation about our own lives and affections, transfiguring them in a superhuman light that robs us of ourselves and of our world, only to return our world and ourselves to us, drenched in a truer lethe. Might not the union to which we aspire be a union with other spirits? Might there be a supreme spirit, or perfect form of spiritual life, to which all spirits were inwardly directed? At bottom, this suggestion introduces nothing new. Any spirit inwardly aspired to a specific form of life, that form of life would be its good. And if all spirits aspired to the same form of life, that form of life would be the good, absolute because universally relative. A supreme spirit that should actualize that ideal, as for instance, by being omniscient, would possess the good, and all lovers of the good would be united with him morally, but not existentially, since the other spirits that aspired to omniscience without possessing it would ipso facto not be that supreme spirit itself, and could embrace that good only in prayer. If, on the other hand, we conceive the supreme spirit not as simply actualizing the good pursued by each spirit, but as a power with which all must reckon, union with the supreme spirit could never be wholly spiritual, but would remain in some measure political, and such as pious souls without spiritual insight seek to establish their religion. In seeking union with any other spirit, we are therefore seeking either the good, and that this other spirit realizes the perfection to which we are inwardly addressed, or else we are seeking such conformity with power and with truth as is necessary to the attainment of a proper good. So the matter seems to end if we take spirits existentially and conceive union with them materially as union in a tug of war. But a tug of war and social union generally does produce spiritual union, not because the spirits pull as an absurd moral materialism supposes, but because when bodies pull well together and psyches are akin, spirits for the time being become unanimous. Each has the very purpose, the very hope that animates each of the others, and this actual spiritual unison is not unconscious. Spirit is divided into spirits by its organs, and into intuitions by its occasions. But we have seen that spiritually it is homogeneous, and everywhere transcendental and potentially infinite. When, therefore, in two souls it thinks the same thought, or sees the same fact, while the intuitions remain two, their object is identical. Else we could never think twice of the same thing privately, or ever think of the same thing together. Yet we know that we do so, because we are deeply aware of our animal separateness and cohabitation. The presence of the friend or enemy resets the whole soul, and there is nothing of which we are more quickly conscious than of thinking alike or of thinking differently. This feeling often leads to rash alliances in the world, rash because real cooperation does not depend on spiritual union, but on confluence of functions and interests, often more harmonious and cooperative for being diverse, and the spes animi credula vitae in this world is an ignis fatuus, yet not so in the other world, in the realm of spirit, for there we are not looking for fidelity or active support or common ascendancy over opinion, but for the miraculous rhyming of mind with mind, when a thought, we know not whence or why, re-echoes our thought, confirms and clarifies it, setting it apart flux of irrevocable sensation. This spiritual bond is enough. The occasions when it is discovered may or may not recur. The happiness lies in the sense of an intuition once shared, a thought once anchored and become domiciled in history. Then the clearness of the light that had once shone upon us ceases to seem barren, as if a star, burning alone, had news of another star, alive with the same fire. Such unanimity would be a fact in the realm of truth prior to being discovered, and when the discovery brought a sense of spiritual fellowship, the comfort of this added intuition would not make union less spiritual, for we suppose material contact to be absent or impossible, as when our unknown friend is dead, or not yet born, or perhaps non-human, and what we gain is only fellowship and worship, reduplicating the light that falls within each of us upon the realm of ideas. The repetition of insights, though it may fortify an uncertain mind, is not spiritually important, and each angel, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is the only individual of his species. In fact, the consideration of instances of spirit as events in nature is external to their spiritual import. Their occasions distribute them through physical space and time, but internally, though they are living acts, and in that sense events, they are distributed only by the relations of their subject matter, and individuated only by the ideas that they light up. Intellectually, two exactly similar intuitions make but one idea, being intuitions of the same essence. The multitude of witnesses, therefore, though it has animal weight, adds nothing to the truth or beauty of any revelation. It adds nothing to the happiness of pure life in the spirit. That no spirit can absorb any other is evident, since spirit, as I use the word, is an act, not a transferable or transformable substance. Therefore, any spiritual union actually experienced is necessarily specious and a pure datum of intuition. Not that a real union between spirits may not exist, and that separate minds may be unanimous, but this unanimity would be a fact external to their experience of it, a truth about them which they might conceive and credit, but which could not in itself be a condition or ecstasy attained by either of them. Yet, the union that mystics speak of seems to be emphatically a state into which they pass, internal, certain, and overwhelmingly actual. It has the surprising and all-solving character of a datum, and the character of a datum, by definition, is exactly the same whether it happens to be true or merely imaginary. Therefore, the only spiritual union that can be certain, obvious, and intrinsically blissful must be not a union between two spirits, but the unity of a spirit within itself. This conclusion is a corollary from the general critical principle that nothing given exists. That which certainly exists in such a case is only the intuition of that datum, not the datum in its own specious field, which is that of essence. So mystic union resides in intuition. It is not a union of objects or with objects, but a synthesis reached in life and expressed in a given quality of feeling. This is a feeling of union and bliss, but the given union does not exist. It would abolish the universe if it did. Only the feeling of union exists, and if the bliss exists for a moment, not without a certain deceptiveness as to its absolute volume and finality, this is only because, in the case of inarticulate feelings, we give the same name to the intuition and to the quality revealed to that intuition. The feeling of bliss exists. The bliss, if taken for a secret reality revealed or for the truth of the universe, certainly does not exist. For the world continues to be just as divided, just as obscure, and just as little blissful as it was before. Spiritual union with the good does not, then, alter the general facts or discover any general truth. It is a new dawn within. Where the sky was clouded, it is clear, namely, in the mind. The currents that confused and abolished one another before, joined now in one harmonious deliverance, with an all-solving force, and we must not infer that there must be ignorance of the world or a pious monotony involved in the spiritual symphony. On the contrary, the whole torrent and violence of things swells within it and exalts it. There is nothing too painful or too audacious to be included, only it cannot be included as it would exist outside in separation and willful blindness. The union into which it now enters transmutes it, and its effect in another realm of being, a creation of the witnessing and recording spirit. Experience cannot contain bodily any of its posited objects, or even its own past in its past existence. It can contain only the thought of them. It obviously cannot make identical the contradictory beliefs and desires afloat in the universe, but it can compose in thought a single drama out of their conflict, where the spectacle of their folly turns into wisdom, and their ruin into salvation. There might seem to be aesthetic cruelty and intellectual selfishness in such an enjoyment of evil at a speculative distance, and this would indeed be the case if spirit were a power and either produced or did not wish to abolish the horrors of this world in order to gloat on them from a private heaven. But spirit has no power, and the will that supports and evokes spirit and exerts power to that extent is entirely secondary and sympathetic, being the will to understand all will and to love all the goods that will anywhere aspires to create. Spirit, therefore, would not be expressing its own will if it condoned any evil or was dead to any good, but its nature forbids it to repeat within itself the efforts, sufferings, or pleasures that it understands, for it cannot then understand or transcend them. Such repetition would not be ignominious, and would reduce spirit again to utter captivity, while its vocation is precisely dominion, spiritual dominion, without distraction, responsibility, or power. Not, however, without joy, such as the full exercise of will necessarily brings when it is conscious. Thus, it is at once a sad, a comic, and a glorious spectacle that existence presents to spirit. Spirit would never have commanded this performance like a Nero if that had been within its power. It understands and feels the inwardness of the matter far too well for that. Yet it watches and records the whole with avidity, though not without tears. How far this liberation of spirit from all it finds afoot differs from selfishness appears in this, that the evils spirit transcends are in its own sufferings, since no catastrophe in nature would involve any evil if nature had remained unconscious. Spirit captive has endured whatsoever spirit free may turn into glowing tragedies, and it would contradict its own will if it did not rejoice in its final freedom. Yet even this tragic wisdom and tearful rapture are imposed on the spirit by a power above it. Had it the choice, perhaps it would renounce this victory also, and humbly prefer silence and peace. But choosing is not its office. It cannot exist before it exists, and decide whether or not to bring itself into existence. And if it thinks it can kill itself, that is a psychic illusion, for it cannot prevent its rebirth. Nor is it asked to decide how much is worth enduring in order that something may be enjoyed. Accepting that which is offered as, be it pious or rebellious, spirit cannot help doing. It may distinguish the direction in which the good lies. It lies in the direction of harmony, harmony between the will and its fortunes, and harmony within the subject matter open to apprehension. A world without evil in it, that is, without contradiction in the wills animating the various parts, would be better than a world in conflict. And if this seems to wash the field of experience somewhat too clean, and to diminish too much the risks and excitements of living, this feeling must be pronounced vicious and a remnant of perfectly mad cruelty and masochism. There are creatures that might, for a moment, find nothing interesting to do if evil ceased to torment them. Yet if they had eyes and hands, they might soon find work without torment and images without stain. The thunder of chaos receding would render audible the music of the spheres, the life of a universe where the good was not posited but realized. If we imagine this harmony hypostasized into an actual intuition, we conceive the mind of God in its omniscience and glory. It is therefore perfectly legitimate to say that the union craved is union with God, and that when we have experience of such union, we are merged in God indistinguishably and feel that we become God. Yet this can be true only of the essence that we have hypothesized into a divine person, and nothing proves that such a God exists, or that we have been really united with him, or cease to be our separate physical selves. On the contrary, if a true union of this kind is to take place between two existing spirits, it must be more than the experience of union, and God must be more than ourselves thinking we have become God. Our experience must be derived from its object, and God must be a power infusing that experience into us by an act of grace. As is evidently the case in human love or mutual understanding, there would be no union and no society if our friends were all personages in our own novels. Instead of being united with others, we should only be deploying ourselves. This inner dialogue is indeed what the life of spirit terminates in at any given point or in any given person. It is all that experience can contain. Yet intelligence, which is the cream of experience, transcends experience by revealing to it its own secondary nature and the existence of its thousand causes and companions. And union with these ambient realities, harmony between these free and independent facts, makes the surprise and the joy of friendship. Here lies the human advantage that popular positive religion has over mystical insight. It brings us into communion with the gods and socializes our inner comforts and aspiration by ascribing them to friendly intercessions and divine favors. The myth is deeply true and salutary. We are not self-created spirits, but everything, including our best inspirations, comes to us from beyond ourselves, from the primeval fountains of matter. But the dramatis personae of popular religion are fabulous and grow more and more novelesque as we make them more and more human. Intercourse with these invisible persons is not, even in fancy, an ideal union between spirits, but only social intercourse between psychic agents interacting under common conditions in a natural world. Even miracles, when they are admitted, obey the properties and conventions of some divine economy rather than the good hypostasized. God now seems a particular monarch against whom we might rebel or to whom we might swear allegiance. His existence becomes a question of cosmology and political history to be established by rational evidence. The point would be important morally, inasmuch as, being a natural psyche with a will shown in sporadic action, an existing deity might greatly influence the fortunes of other souls. He might be a great friend to some, but others would surely find him an enemy, because action in a particular world cannot possibly pursue or secure all particular goods, and the lovers of the goods sacrificed would cry to heaven against God for vengeance. Heaven would there signify all good, unrealizable at any point in an existing world, but inviolate in its essential authority and goodness. God, on the other hand, would signify the power dominant over us for the time being. Job felt the conflict between these two claims to allegiance, that of the good and that of the Lord, and the whirlwind enforced the claims of power with a deafening eloquence, utterly unconvincing to the spirit. Many a pagan god might be blameless and perfect, and might point with pride to his mighty works, or even, like Apollo and the Muses, to his inspiring or healing influence. He might, in a sense, be holy in that he realized his chosen good absolutely, and remained steadfast, whatever monstrous, gross chaos might vomit around him. But before a god of power could speak persuasively to the spirit, he would need in his own person to be spiritual and religious. He would need to be inspired by a perfect understanding and love of all goods. In his action, however powerful he might be, he could never bring all these goods at once into existence. Probably as no power can assure itself against the intrusion of some other power. He would be incapable of bringing even some goods into existence in perfect order and uncontaminated, so that his choice of the greatest possible good at each moment would really be a choice of the least of evils. To such a patient and merciful power, spirit might well cry, "Though thou slay me, yet will I trust in thee." And there would be a spiritual union possible with the antecedent will of God, addressed to universal good, as well as political submission and piety towards his consequent will, determining actual events. Essentially, however, it is not with the gods of popular religion that spiritual union is possible. They are not themselves at peace with mankind, with one another, or with the universe. Mystics are normally believers in the orthodoxy of their day, not being curious about facts, nor thinking opinion very important, yet they cannot help piercing the reigning myths, not critically, but interpretively, and reaching truths about the spiritual life at once more abstruse than traditional dogmas and more intimate. Why does the mystic keep his vigils and fasts, if not to escape from subjection to things external, and in the first place, from the cravings and illusions of his individual self, the most accidental of seats for the spirit, and, as he feels, the most unworthy? It would be a sorry failure to relapse in the end into the worship of earthly prosperity or disputatious learning, or into subjection to new accidental passions and hypnotic powers. And what else are the benefits proposed by popular religions? Paradises, as the Indians know, are fit rewards for active virtue, temporal rewards for occasional good conduct. But paradises are but stepping stones for the spirit. And what does it matter whether the stepping stone be a lump of gold or of granite, if only the foot neither slips nor sticks there, but leaps easily to safety and freedom? And this safety and freedom cannot be found in union with any existing being. If we say it is union with Brahma, we must understand by Brahma pure spirit present in all its instances, not any one instance, however extraordinary. And if, in order to avoid mythology, we speak rather of nirvana, we must understand by this no passive lapse from existence, but a moral victory over it. occasionally possible, though never physically final. What is suspended is not existence, but ignorance, and what is gained is not indifference, but equilibrium. That spirit should have its center in itself, wherever and whenever it may exist, so that all its adventures must be ideal and all its symbols internal and specious follows from its transcendental nature. This nature was clearly, if inadequately, expressed by Aristotle when he called it intellect in act, an act being a spontaneous, transitional, momentary exercise of life, and intellect being such an act in an animal psyche that has become perfectly cognitive and conscious. But intellect is only the side of spirit that is addressed to knowledge and system, and life may be perfectly actualized also in feeling and in imagination. Everywhere, however, this actuality will be conscious light, the dawn of attention making something present, so that spirit can neither escape from itself nor be confined to any object or sentiment, for these are present only in the act, by being felt or conceived, and they have no hold on spirit to prevent it from living on and being differently active. That which can hold spirit down to study objects and fix categories is only the power of matter, which also elicits spirit itself, and the healthy limitations of the psyche give to each special spirit its special circle of sane thoughts. But an act is necessarily self-limited and self-delivered. What it does or thinks, it can never undo or unthink, and spirit may shine again in another act, similar or dissimilar to the last, according to psychic and physical occasions. The idea of final union with anything specific, even with omniscience or with pure being, therefore contradicts the very nature of spirit. In one sense, there is always union with so much as the spirit has clearly felt or conceived, since it is in the same act that makes the actuality of spirit and the actuality of the feeling or thought. But in another sense, there is never union, never completion or finality, since an absorbed datum dies with the actual absorption in it, and no act, dying as it must in the process of living, can abolish or prevent a further act. A sustained act would be perfectly possible if there were, as Aristotle supposed, perfectly sustained celestial motions. But everlasting sameness is something non-natural and a fabulous materialization of ideal eternity. Eternity belongs properly only to essences and truths, and may be extended by assimilation to intuitions and their deliverance, but never in their existence. In their existence, intuitions are events. They arise and vanish, and in the interval they illustrate non sens, since they fill a natural moment and actualize some essence or truth in itself eternal. But the duration of such an actual non-stance is not to be measured astronomically in fractions of a second or in light years. It is a unit, however long, sustained, or however fugitive, in the realm of spirit, spiritually individuated by its quality and deliverance, not by its station, which it borrows from its organ in physical time and space. For although each intuition has a date and a home in the physical world, if viewed from the outside or historically, when viewed from within, each always stands in the middle of the temporal and spatial universe, introducing a moral center into a flux where probably no center exists physically. These moral centers are as many as they happen to be, so that the realm of spirit is intrinsically a democracy, as the realm of truth is not. Spirit being everywhere sovereign in its own right, this sovereignty, however, is only spiritual, as human equality, when not a sham, is only spiritual, and the sovereignty of each at home expressly invites and rejoices in the home sovereignty of all the others. For spirit exists, it is not a tyrannical idea to be imposed on spirit, and existence is intrinsically dispersed, tireless, inexhaustible in its youth, ready to die and to be reborn, to discover and to rediscover, to sing sometimes an old song and sometimes a new one. The only totality or finality is ideal. It is the truth. But no view of the truth can be final in the life of spirit. Even omniscience, if it were possible, would not be final there. It would be a single instance of spirit, a supremely complex intuition. Simpler and partly ignorant intuitions would remain possible and perhaps better. The truth that is requisite for the honor and peace of spirit is not omniscience, but the absence of delusions. And this, where humility exists, does not demand infinite information. So it happens also when a man surveys his personal history. There is no contribution of experience that need be excluded from recollection, but the new total at each moment forms a new object, caught in a new intuition. The various perspectives have arisen in the same world. They contain errors and contradictions if turned into absolute dogmas and made to debate every point face to face, as if they stood or ought to stand in one another's shoes. But seen in their origin and causes, they are always complementary, explicable naturally, and unified objectively in the realm of truth. Yet actually, in the realm of spirit, every intuition is a flying spark, private, momentary, and saved from total death only by its ideal bonds and its inner vision of eternity. Each spark, by the radiation of its light, has revealed for a moment one region of heaven, and in that heaven it is united with its friends by mutual confirmation, with its enemies by the common risks of existence, and a common appeal to the jurisdiction of fact. Intent on the same reality, material or ideal, and spreading over different parts of it. All intuitions, the greatest with the least, form the galaxy of spirit. This is an unwitting conspiracy of free natural beings, each springing from its own seed in its own country, and growing into whatsoever may flow from the potentialities of its substance and fortunes. The union is a fact in the realm of truth, the fact that many spirits or instances of spirit exist in the same universe, partly similar, partly dissimilar, sometimes unanimous, sometimes complementary in their insights. I say again, complementary rather than contradictory, because although judgments may be contradictory if expressed in words, they become supplementary phases in the history of judgment when this history is surveyed as a whole. They may be judgments about different objects, or in regard to the same object. They may express different fractions of the relations between that object and different souls. The Babel is but the totality of languages, and if each seems gibberish to the others, there is always some analogy in their logics, for they are languages, and some identity in their object, since they exist in the natural world. So the galaxy of spirits has a natural orderliness in its moral confusion, and each spirit in its solitude a great kinship to all the others. even if some or all at the last judgment should discover the spiritual society which they had always composed without knowing it, no mind would become another mind, or like another, for even their common discovery of their relations would present these relations in each case in a different perspective. And an omniscient mind, in holding all perspectives at once in suspense, would differ enormously from all the other minds held by one perspective exclusively. Were not these personal histories and feelings eternally distinct, they could never orchestrate their celestial symphony. On the other hand, it is not persons and their personal limitations that can enter into spiritual union, for the limitations are transcended in being understood, one's own limitations as well as other people's. Persons become translucent, like the souls in Dante's paradise, and what each sees in the others is only that part of the truth which they saw. It is in them that this part became visible, for the truth is not visible to itself. Therefore this remains a union of spirits, of thoughts living and thinking, each a special thought. But the rest of the man disappears, as in reading a book, the material book is forgotten, and the reader lives in rehearsing the author's thoughts without thinking of the author. At least this happens when the book is interesting and the author was himself lost in his subject. The realm of spirit is not to be entered by literary peacocks, or by bibliophiles that do not read, but hoard their books, pat them, and talk about them. So in communion between spirits, the man or the God is rendered invisible by the light he diffuses, and we are inwardly united only with so much of him as by his gifts and his grace can exist also beyond his person and can become a part of ourselves. For the spirit, therefore, the dead are still living, and the living are present noumena, like the remembered dead. This is not to say that the real existence of persons, or that contact or friendship with them, has not a real function, and one prior to the function of ideas. Friends are important for the spirit, as a man's own identity and fortunes are important. Without such special occasions and attachments, spirit would have no foothold in nature and could not exist. Occasions, we have said, distribute spirit among psyches and divide each spirit into intuitions. Yet intuition itself is born out of a synthesis. In the field it opens up, embraces, in conception, all that the flux of existence may have diversified and separated. The world was not made for the spirit, nor by the spirit, as the beautiful is. But for this very reason, the world and the truth about the world have a tutelary function and a guiding function in the life of spirit. They are the gates through which the garden of the beautiful may be safely entered, the walls by which that garden is circumscribed and defended. The first step towards union with the good is to have settled one's accounts with the world and with the truth. After that, truth and fiction may be entertained together, and the difference between them may be ignored. Yet this license, which the world takes for incompetence or madness in spiritual men, would really be madness or incompetence if it were not founded on health, on adjustment to universal power, and on a deep ironical allegiance to the truth. When such moral health is presupposed, the perspectives of truth and of fiction may be developed together, with no spiritual fear of either, since the agile spirit can digest both. If union must be unity within the spirit, might we not say finally that the good is the existence of spirit itself? Not at all. Spirit is evidently a prerequisite to union within the spirit. But spirit is more often distracted than harmonious. and the attainment of harmony depends on many other causes than those that suffice to evoke spirit. The causes and conditions of the good are not themselves good, else matter and universal will would be good, and more radically good than spirit, since they are needed to generate it. The good lies not behind all this movement, but before it. It is the end that life proposes to itself when conscious and rational. Each endeavor furnishes spirit, which is by nature sympathetic with an initial criterion of values. Whatsoever helps each flower to grow seems good to the dramatizing spirit, and whatsoever blights it seems evil. But how shall the relative value of these endeavors be judged? The most considered judgment could only express some other instance of initial will, a preference as contingent and groundless as those it criticizes. Shall the spirit succumb to this universal egotism and judge that whatsoever in the universe conduces to the free exercise of spirit shall be pronounced good, and whatsoever hinders that exercise shall be pronounced evil? Such a shamelessly egotistical judgment is in fact implicit in so much of unconscious will as rushes blindly to create spirit. But the peculiarity of spirit, when once it exists, is not to be blind and to be eternally ashamed of egotism. Its will is not to will, but to understand all will, and so without willing any of the ends that universal will pursues, not even the will to create spirit, it sees the beauty of all those ends, including the beauty of its own impartial but enamored vision. Spirit, too, is only an incident in the life of nature. The will to be spiritual can as little be pronounced to be absolutely good as can any other natural impulse. Yet, like any other natural impulse, when once launched into life, it inevitably becomes a criterion by which all other things may be judged relatively. Therefore, the spirit, if free to criticize its enemies, is free also to judge its own aspirations tragically or satirically, and the higher flights of wisdom and self-knowledge have always done so. Never, however, when spirit is vigorous and free, can it judge any fate coldly or any aspiration unsympathetically, because to be sympathetic and warm towards all endeavors, though they may know nothing of themselves, is the very essence of spirit. And how then should it not be so towards its own endeavors? Yet this acceptance and pursuit of its specific aims will never be safe or pure until they are qualified by a prior complete renunciation of all illusions about them. The spirit can never be altogether spiritual or morally other than a caprice of blind will until it has traversed the dark night described by St. John of the Cross and adopted his motto, nothing, nothing, nothing. It is only on this understanding that all things may be understood without confusion, loved without disgrace, and touched without infection, or that a life of action for the spirit can be a life of prayer. Henceforth, we are playing a part. We do not become kings because we may wear a crown upon this stage, nor fools because it is set down for us to talk nonsense. We may give commands when they are in character without arrogance, follow our fortunes without greed, and declare our affections without fear of disillusion. The disillusion has come already, and the affection flows out notwithstanding, without any claims. We know that the power that creates us and shapes our passions and prompts our acts is the poet's, and not our own, that our knowledge is but faith moving in the dark, our joy a gift of grace, our immortality a subtle translation of time into reality, where all that we have missed is ours, and where what we call ours is the least part of ourselves. We are not impatient of injustice. It is not the fate that overtakes us that makes our dignity, but the detachment with which we suffer it. All belongs to the necessary passion and death of the spirit, that today rides upon an ass into its kingdom, to be crucified tomorrow between two thieves, and on the third day to rise again from the dead. In the animal psyche, the passions follow one another or battle for supremacy, and the distracted spirit runs helter-skelter among them, impressed by the sophistical arguments which each of them offers for itself. But if the psyche grows integrated and rational, its center, which is the organ of spirit, becomes dominant, and all those eloquent passions begin to be compared and judged, and their probable issue to be foreknown and discounted. The waves will not be stilled, but they will now beat against a rock, and with inner security comes a great inner clearness. We may now become aware of the world to any depth, in any degree of complexity. We shall have reduced our psychic center to its precise function as a center, and from the center, in duly shaded perspectives, the spirit may spread its silent light over all nature and all essence. By so fortifying the spirit, we shall not have saved the world. All its titular saviors have left the world much as it was, but we can reconcile ourselves with the world by doing it justice. It is a natural process. Why should it have been other than it happens to be? We shall also have reconciled ourselves with our own destiny. Materially, we cannot be more than poor animal experiments, lame yet wonderful, defeated yet breaking out in places into a jubilant sympathy with all creation. Spirit may live in its universal affinities, forgiving itself its ignorant errors and childish woes. It could not have suffered if it had not loved, and to love is to have eyes for the beautiful. This privilege is bought at a great price, but spirit speaks for a part of universal will, for that part which becomes conscious. It is therefore essentially brave as it is essentially enamored, and the goal once seen, it cannot count the cost. Intermittence is intrinsic to life, to feeling, to thought, so are partiality and finitude. Spirit cannot achieve unity or perfection physically. The living flame must dance. It suffices that its light should fall on things steadfast and true, worthy to be discerned and returned to and treasured, so that though spirit be everywhere halting in achievement, it may be always perfect in allegiance. Its happiness must always remain volatile, and its union with the good ideal. This union is achieved not by physical possession or identity, but by intellectual worship, in which spirit, forgetting itself, becomes pure vision and pure love. Then to the spirit that has renounced all things are restored, and having renounced itself also, it cannot resist any inspiration to think evil of any good, but embraces them all in the eternal object of its worship, not as they may have existed in the world in passing and in conflict, but as they lie ideally reconciled in the bosom of good, at peace at last with themselves and with one another.